4 books on the life of Jesus, the Gospels, are each unique in their own way. They have their own approaches, their own styles, but they're in full agreement on their central question, who is Jesus? They all come to the conclusion this was God's own Son. But notice how each one opens. Matthew is into Hebrew prophecy, so he begins with a lengthy family tree. Mark is all about action, so he starts out with the spectacle of John the Baptist, wastes no time getting into it. Luke is a reporter, a listener, so he begins with the experience of Mary. But John? Well, what can we say about John? Buckle up, folks. John begins with something that sounds like a riddle. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. You could call it, well, a word game. John opens with an 18-verse prologue, but we could really call it an overture, where he hits all the themes his book will cover. And you can't just move along nothing to see here. Each sentence is arresting, compelling. So, without further ado, let's have at it. Here's the whole passage as read by the actor Christopher Plummer from the Good News translation.
In the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. From the very beginning, the Word was with God. Through him God made all things. Not one thing in all creation was made without him. The Word was the source of life, and this life brought light to people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has never put it out. God sent his messenger, a man named John, who came to tell people about the light, so that all should hear the message and believe. He himself was not the light. He came to tell about the light. This was the real light, the light that comes into the world and shines on all people. The Word was in the world, and though God made the world through him, yet the world did not recognize him. He came to his own country, but his own people did not receive him. Some, however, did receive him and believed in him, so he gave them the right to become God's children. They did not become God's children by natural means, that is, by being born as the children of a human father. God himself was their father. The Word became a human being, and full of grace and truth, lived among us. We saw his glory, the glory which he received as the Father's only Son. John spoke about him.
This is the one I was talking about when I said, he comes after me. But he is greater than I am, because he existed before I was born.
Out of the fullness of his grace, he has blessed us all, giving us one blessing after another. God gave the law through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. The only Son, who is the same as God and is at the Father's side, he has made him known.
I think we can agree there's a lot going on there. It's been said of John's gospel that it's shallow enough for a child to wade in and deep enough to drown an elephant. And through years of studying and teaching it, I found that to be true. But with John 1, we entered this pool from the deep end. For example, in the beginning was the Word. In his first sentence, John is talking to Jews and to Greeks. In the beginning, well, that's Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. That's what Jews called Genesis, in the beginning. It wasn't called by the name Genesis then. People referred to works by their first line, the first thing they saw on the scroll. So John is evoking God's creation of the world, the most awesome verse in Hebrew scripture. And then the Word. The Greek here is logos. And for Greeks, it meant the force that holds all of creation together. It also meant reason, rational thought. This was a big idea. They called this logos the Word. Jews also used this word, though, and they associated it with the word or law of God, kind of the way we do in church. The Word is God's law and his wisdom. Now, John is saying, before time itself, there was this force, this word or wisdom, power, truth, and it was in the presence of God, literally face to face with God. That's how the language works. And then John says, this word, this power, was God. Now, that would grab the reader, Jew or Greek, kind of the same way it still grabs us. But don't miss this. The Word was with God, yet was God. That's the part that gets us. With and was. Now, that's impossible in normal thinking. If I'm with you, I can't be you, right? But with the awesomeness of God, it's possible. It brings us to the Trinity. Christ is fully God, not separate, yet distinct. A person of God. John will never attempt to explain this, nor will the Bible itself, nor should we venture where angels fear to tread. If we could explain it, we would lose the divinity, the mystery of it, and we need that mystery in worship, and to help us understand that God is not understandable. If you get the Trinity, it's a sign you don't. It can't be gotten. John's next idea is that Jesus is a full agent of the creation. That's an eyebrow raiser too, isn't it? Do you think of the creation and connect it to Jesus? All things were made through him, John says. Now let's think about this. John's readers might well have known something about Jesus. They knew he was a man. They might have even known about his resurrection, his miracles. But John has really blown their minds here. He says Jesus was pre-existent, already around before time began, and that the Father created everything through him. Wow. Now let's call for a backup here, just in case we think that this is just a John thing, that John is just kind of exaggerating. Paul puts the same idea this way. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, for in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or powers. All things have been created through him and for him. He himself is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Now this is Christ we're talking about, not the Father. 20th century poet T.S. Eliot called this the still point to the turning world. This is what theologians would call high Christology. It's as far away as you could possibly get from gentle Jesus, meek and mild, a good teacher, a nice man. Luke's tiny baby, wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger, is the very hinge on which all creation turns. Then John identifies Jesus with two images, life and light. John mentions life 36 times in his gospel. One reason a child can wade into this pool is that John uses words like light, life, word, love, born, small words that work as symbols of big ideas. Jesus brings life, and he brings light, which is meaning, understanding. C.S. Lewis said, I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. To know and follow Jesus is to see the world and daily life and yourself in a new way. He is light. John's prologue introduces us to John the Baptist, who will take over the story later on in the chapter. This is something all four Gospels do. The author wants us to know John the Baptizer was not the light, just the messenger of it. This was important. The point needed to be made that John, who was a celebrity in that time, was not the Messiah, but the messenger of the Messiah. Because there was a certain amount of confusion about that in the first century. You remember Jesus later asked his disciples, Who do people say that I am? And they said, Some say you're John the Baptist. Both men created a stir at about the same time. They were both itinerant preachers. But there was only one Jesus. Likely one of the reasons these Gospels were written was to sort this kind of thing out. Then John tells us about how the world received him, even though he was pre-existent, even though all things were created through him, even though this was his world, his people, meaning the people of old Israel. They rejected him. However, John says there were others who received him, and this is one of those cornerstone Bible verses. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God. For John, the whole prologue, this whole section, has been working up to this verse. Because John says elsewhere, the reason he's written this book is, quote, so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. And again, John is laying out a theme he'll expand on, the new birth. 2 chapters from now, Nicodemus will make that night visit to Jesus and learn what it means to be born of the Spirit rather than the flesh. So, John has been talking philosophically all this time, talking about the universe and creation, about light and darkness, the pre-existent Word, but now he gives us the what's in it for me angle. You can receive power to become a child of God through this Word. In the last few verses, John draws his conclusion, and his conclusion is a famous one. The Word became flesh and lived among us. We call this doctrine the Incarnation. It's the idea that God, in his perfection, could only meet humanity in all its limitation by becoming one of us. So the pre-existent creative force that is God clothed himself in flesh and bone and blood and became one of us. There are two aspects to this. Jesus represents us to God, but he also represents God to us. Jesus will say later, He who has seen me has seen the Father. This is the very essence, the very core of Christianity. God becoming a human being to identify with us, and our being able to come to God through Jesus. John goes on to describe the goodness and grace of Jesus and how we receive goodness and grace through him. So you can see, we've done the child's wading pool version of this passage. No elephants were drowned in the recording of this lesson. But let me leave you with a challenge. If you're like most of us, and that read the Bible in a year challenge is a little intimidating, after all it is, why not take a smaller bite? John has 21 chapters. You can read a chapter a day in 3 weeks, less than a month. And I can't think of a better way to make 2021 a better year, right from the get-go. John reads well. Generally, each chapter is a self-contained story. And let Gail and me know if you take this challenge. We've been through a year of the weird. Why not make this a year of the Word? Thanks for listening.